Welcome to a radical discussion of independence, free will, liberty, and the left-hand path. This is Damon Ossifer with your host, Paul Frederick. All right, let's see how this goes. All right, well, welcome to Saturnian Sessions, where we get into the dark, groovy vibes that seep into the psyche on a Saturday night. And tonight my guest is Cygnus Onyx Flame. That is my brother, Lloyd Keane, hailing from Ottawa, Ontario, with a new album forthcoming. Hi, Lloyd. Welcome back.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here again.
Great to have you back, man. So let's start with, you've got a new album coming out with Cygnus Onyx Flame. I think when you were on the show before, and this was a little while back, we were highlighting a different project of yours that was more of a band type thing, and now you're doing a solo type thing, and that's Cygnus Onyx Flame. So tell us what that's all about.
The band Obsidian Will is a trio. And before the band started in about 2013, I'd been playing around with GarageBand and layering sounds, trying to get the idea of things are in my head. How can I translate that into sound bites and pieces? And I've been working with Photoshop at the time, and Photoshop uses layers. So I was thinking, well, how can I do that with sound? I have no musical background really, so it was more of, trying to get that emotive component to it. And so I did that for about 3 years or so. Obsidian Will started, and I kind of put that off to the side. And what had ended up happening was I just decided, as you know, working with bands, you have an idea, you may want to translate it somehow, but you give it to two other people, they have a different interpretation. And that's fine for the band, but not so much for necessarily representing the art as you want to represent it. And so Cygnus Onyx Flame combines a lot of my previous play in a little more serious way. And it's completely up to me what I do with it. So it's a solo project to that degree.
Cool. So what's the vibe of it? What's the vision of Cygnus Onyx Flame?
Dark ambient, I guess. But I'm trying to also, I'm not trying to turn my back on, drum machines and that kind of thing. But if I do anything with, percussion, it's usually very low BPM, like maybe 70 or, 65, somewhere around there. So it's kind of loungy, chill, but then also very dark and brooding, spacey, that kind of thing. So I have several EP releases out on my Bandcamp page, and this one will be the first time where I've actually tried to create a shell, I guess, where I have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning and end will always be similar, almost identical, I would say, but it leaves some place for improv. Whereas before I would have just improvised whatever, like I would have set up my stuff and played. So this is my attempt to get a little more structure without locking into, a song always sounding identical every time I play it. And this is meant primarily for playing live. So once I get this down, it'll be discipline for me to continue with that.
So I want to ask, is there's a previous album that you released with COF that was called Do Not Mourn for Giuliana. Is that the most recent one?
No, Transmissions from the Void is the most recent one.
Okay. Yeah. So I detected in some of those, and I think Transmissions from the Void also, but specifically on Giuliana, I noticed there's more beats, there's more rhythms, there's more intensive like voice sampling, and stuff like that. Is that sort of a new a new dimension that you're developing with the work?
Yeah, I mean, anything I put out is a serious form of play. So what I'm trying to understand is how can I use samples, and it's easy enough. Sorry, not easy, but it's easier to do when you're sitting at your computer and you can, futz around. But if you're doing it live on stage, it's something different. So I'm always trying to keep an eye open for how would I do this live. So I don't think there'll be any samples in the new one that'll be released, but the past ones were there's a way of using samples which are part of the narrative. So not so much about lyrics, but more about adding to the tone or trying to get across some aspect of the artistic vision through samples from movies or having very wonderful friends who volunteer to help, that kind of thing. So it's definitely something I'm not an expert in. Definitely working towards understanding that better and probably use it more in the future.
Well, it's cool. I really like it. I think it adds like a new dimension to it. So I really dig it. I enjoy it. I like the direction that things are going in. So the new album is Songs for a Cosmonaut.
Mm.
So tell us what that's all about.
Oh, is that all? No problem. um, so anything that I make, so I have the two sites. I have a SoundCloud, which is essentially just play and goofing around and putting some ideas out. And the Bandcamp ones are more serious, focused EPs. And so I always have an idea or a concept that I'm trying to communicate. And I don't have a great deal of musical background. So everything I do is very, very simple. But that's how I enjoy listening to very simple music and I enjoy playing it. So this one, the idea was sort of this notion of a cosmonaut. Anything to do with space for me, external space is essentially a metaphor for initiatory process or the inner universe or the turning inward. And so this is about each of the songs in the EP are going to represent some aspect of the initiatory quest or journey, if you want to talk about that. Yeah.
So, can you talk about? I mean, you and I both have some experience with the esoteric order of Beelzebub, of the Temple of Set. The concept of cosmonaut. The way that you're utilizing that term, are you thinking specifically of like Russian space program, or is there something more? Is there something more to it?
There's something more to it. Essentially. I guess whether it was started in complete seriousness or not, EOB, Esoteric Order of Beelzebub, often refer to each other as cosmonauts. I have always taken that as a very serious title because it represents somebody who has the courage to explore in the unknown and a little bit bonkers enough to go out and do the stuff that most people wouldn't rather do. I mean, it's easier to sit on your couch and do nothing. Or consume television programs, but to get up, to go put yourself into a mind frame where you need to create and get that flame out there for people to see and experience, I think is really important. And that to me is what a cosmonaut does. It goes inward, but then at the same time has to go outward, has to bring out what it is that we've created and put it out into the world. So that to me, the song. Originally, I was going to call it Songs from a Cosmonaut. And then that seemed not so much pompous, but it was like, I'm really not doing this for somebody else. I'm doing it for myself. So in a way that the songs are for me. And in the process, maybe reciprocation can occur where someone may hear it, be inspired to do their own thing. Usually what happens to me is my simple art inspires people that have greater skill and capacity. Then they come back and make something awesome. And it's always great when someone says, "Oh, thank you so much for that inspiration." Like, what the fuck? It's like, glad you could do that. So yeah, that's the idea. It has a dual meaning. The cosmonaut's me, but it's also anybody else out there who might be inspired to do something because of hearing that.
Yeah. So two things I want to add to that. One is as far as like craziness. I think all great innovators and entrepreneurs and artists are at least a little bit crazy, a little bit crazy is good. You got to have a little bit crazy in there, right? So I think that's a good thing. And to me, that's always been kind of like wrapped up in the cosmonaut term, as EOB has used it. And the other thing is that's really significant about what you said about for a cosmonaut, right, versus from a cosmonaut, because first of all, it talks about what this offering can do for the person, right? It's get buy-in from the person, because really, when you're doing music, the person who's going to ever listen to this or buy the music or something is someone that you want them to have buy-in into it, and this came up on another project that you and I had both worked on, called the Red Planet Choir, where the vision of the music was to make music for people who live on Mars one day, right? Yeah. So there was that whole concept. Once you decide what the music is for, who the music is for, and you just have like a general, like just some kind of idea about that helps provide direction and fire and focus to actually create it. Because I think there's a lot of artists, there's a lot of musicians, would-be musicians, who don't think about the for, and all they think about is the from, right? Yeah. It's like that's the self-absorption, the dangerous self-absorption side of artistry. The Ziggy sucked up into his mind, aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, and that's I know a lot of really good musicians, accomplished musicians, who are quite happy, doing their scales and practicing in the basement, and they're ridiculously advanced. And I don't begrudge that. I mean, that takes a lot of time and dedication, but I'm far more interested in communicating and putting it out there. So I would rather be half-assed and putting that out there and then improving as you go. So, the improving is slower, but it's more robust. At least that's how I see it. And, I'm a fairly terrible drummer, but I love playing. And the way I play, because it's so simple in Obsidian Will, it suits the music that we play, this kind of experimental doom ambient sort of thing. And I've had, I've seen drummers play our music, and a lot of times it's, they're playing like as if they were playing in another band. Okay, well, I'm going to play 4/4, but I'm going to play a lot of fill, and I'm going to do it takes a lot of effort to count in my head, so I'm not doing a lot of stuff. There's a lot of empty space, and I think empty space is where that magic can occur. So for us, for Obsidian Will, at least the way I drum, I can only practice when we practice as a band. But when we play live, it's usually quite different from anything else that's up on the stage. So yeah, I find that really interesting.
So have you played live with Cygnus Onyx Flame?
Just one. I did one gig. It was actually quite interesting. I was asked to play in between sets. So there were 4 or 5 different sets that people were playing. And instead of putting on the house music, I was just doing ambient stuff in between, which I thought I would love to do that. In fact, I would love to do that all the time, because you're there and you're adding to the experience of the people that are there, but at the same time, you're not necessarily center stage. You're off to the side, and I really want people to project or to use or experience what I create with their own visions, their own imagery in their mind, to allow that to just go wherever it needs to go, rather than imposing on somebody what they should see or experience when they hear it. So yeah, no, I love that. In fact, I latched on one of my synthesizers and I went off the stage, and some guitarist said, "Oh, it must be nice to just leave your instrument playing." Well, you can do the same damn thing with your guitar. So, just put on the reverb and sit down and go walk away. But yeah, it was a different feeling, that's for sure.
Yeah, I feel that there has to be like that interaction for me. There has to be that interaction and that feedback. You know, that audience participation, that there has to be some kind of like loop like going on. At least that's what's really extraordinary about it. That's what's awesome about it. That's what's awesome about doing a live show is that you have this exchange with this group of people, like a bunch of people, a bunch of individuals, and maybe you have nothing particularly in common with them outside of this, but just the power of music and the rhythm and the vibrations and the frequencies and everything and the imagery of it, it binds everyone together and everyone connects with it. Everyone connects for a moment, and that's what I think is like amazing about it. You know, the whole like, you know, just leaving noise on stage and walking off stage just to make a point, you know, which is a total, you know, I mean, it's like the total deconstructionist, like, you know, thing. And, this is like a Boyd Rice, you know, Boyd Rice would still do something like this. Right. And it's like, you know, I get it and everything, but really whoever did that the first time, which I don't know, was maybe Throbbing Gristle, like in, 1978, did that for the first time. Well, they did it. They made the point. There's not really a big market for that, right? Because again, the question of who, right? I mean, so maybe they're like, that's the whole point of that, is like destroying the question of like who the music is for, and they want to like destroy that to like make some kind of point about it. So I get it, if you need to make a point about it. But for me, doing music live, that's what it's about. It's about connecting, and when it works, when it works out, like if people show up, and
if they show up,
right, if people show up, then it's a wonderful thing. And that's the thing. If you go through all this trouble to do a show, even like a really small show, there's going to be at least 2 people there. There's at least 3 people, and sometimes those are the best. Sometimes that could be great. It could be an awesome, like, intimate soiree.
It's the other bands. It's like, oh, thanks for coming.
Right. Sometimes it's just the other bands. Yeah. So is that so what kind of shows have you experienced doing that? What's your most memorable show? Like any band, any of the bands that you do, what's the most memorable show you've done?
Oh,
your favorite?
Man. It has. Oh, I wouldn't say this is my favorite. The most memorable was Obsidian Will used to be a duo, so it was just me and the guitarist. And our first out of city gig was about 45 minutes out of the city, and it was at this nudist colony, and it was closing, I guess, at the time. So he goes, "Do you want to play?" And I'm like, "Fuck, I guess." Like, do we have to be naked? I mean, I'll do it, but I'd like to know this So we get there. Everyone was clothed, but anyway, we set up. This was not our kind of thing. Like, this is not where we should have been playing. But I respect that. It doesn't seem to be so much an issue anymore. Like, there's so many cross venue type, different types of music playing at one place. Anyhow, we sat down, and for whatever reason, the guitarist, something crapped out with the amp or the guitar, but I couldn't really hear it. So I was trying my best to follow what the hell we were doing. But apparently they could hear the drums across the highway, but they couldn't hear any of the guitar. And then when we returned, it was this downpour. I couldn't see 2 feet in front of me. So it was a very interesting experience to be able to say that we kind of played this gig and almost died getting home. But other than that, it was outstanding.
Well, so is a downpour rain?
Yeah.
While you were playing?
No, this was on the way back. It was just a total shit show. It was great. But we did Anathema Books did a book launch, and we were invited we were one of the music, there's 2 bands playing, and it was interesting because it was a whole room full of people who are sort of occult oriented or inclined. And while Obsidian Will isn't an occult band by any stretch, it was interesting to see that group of people rather than just these, the sort of unfocused audience, because you never know who's going to come in, for the draw. But these people were very specifically focused on the book launch and more interested in that sort of community. And I found that really kind of cool too. That was a fun time.
No, that's cool. That sounds awesome. So how did you, let's back up. How did you get into doing music originally?
All right. Well, you did ask originally. So my my parents bought me a really crappy drum kit many moons ago when I was a kid. Uh, I was going to take lessons, but apparently they wanted me to learn piano first before they would teach me drums. So that didn't work. And I ended up selling or giving my kit away to a person who could play. And he taught me, he's a jazz drummer now. He taught me how to play very basic, rudimentary sort of drum playing. And I did that for a while. And then it just sort of went away. Like I didn't have drums, I didn't have a place to practice. But I started with a band with a colleague of mine at my other job I had, and that was Prophets of Gen Z. So that was like if you could imagine taking Johnny Cash and the Cramps and like just fusing them into some bizarre, weird, fucking folky.
Oh my God, that sounds awesome. I love it. I love it already. I'm a fan.
We played live a few times, but in 2013, Obsidian Will started, and that was, I mean, that's been going since then, and that's been my serious. Well, I mean, as serious as a hobby, sort of. I mean, we're not professional musicians, so it's we keep at it, practicing regularly. So I've always listened to music, but it's just recently where we're starting to play more seriously. In fact, it's at the point now where we've all been talking a little bit about music theory. So now songs take twice as long to figure out because we're like, wait, what are you playing? What is that now? How do we transcribe that?
Yeah, so then what kind of bands were you into like growing up? I think one time we were talking about SNFU, right? SNFU came up once when we were like hanging out, and that's like a hardcore band from Canada. And I don't know where are they from in Canada?
Oh shit! I think Edmonton, but it might be BC. Anyways, yes, the West.
Right. Well, they were touring they were touring through the Midwest, in the 80s, and I saw them, living in Nebraska. I saw them like 3 times, and met them, and partied with them and stuff. And it's like then you and I started talking about SNFU, and I'm like, oh wow! And immediately, we were already connected all of these other things like Satan and black magic and stuff like that. And then that came up. I was like, oh damn, SNFU. So I started thinking, wow, man, was Lloyd like going to hardcore shows and stuff like back in the day? So what was your experience like growing up in Ottawa? Right, you grew up there.
Oh no, I grew up in Regina in Saskatchewan. It's the
Okay.
trapezoid in the middle of the country.
Okay.
So it's
It's a small town.
Oh, at this time the city was about 210,000. So
Okay.
yeah, not tiny, but not a metropolitan center. No, I think I learned like my parents. I listened to a lot of the Beatles when I was a kid. My mom is a huge Elvis fan. My dad, Wilf Carter, kind of the countryside. So that's the kind of thing I'd be listening to growing up. But I think one of my favorite memories, and this could be all made up now, but my first introduction to good metal was we had this music appreciation thing in grade 6 where people would bring in an album. So somebody brought in Black Sabbath,
Oh
and
my
you
God.
put the album cover up, and then the bell starts ringing, and I was like, "What the fuck is going on here?" And it just completely, rips your soul apart. You're into this. Anyway, yeah. So I was always a huge Maiden fan because of the storytelling, and I just love
Yeah.
that. I'd listen to Kiss, but then it'd be like a lot of sex stuff that I don't understand why this is a thing. But
Yeah.
obviously, I can talk about the Trooper, and that's way cooler.
No, that's like most of who is into Kiss is like didn't understand that. I mean, Kiss's biggest fan base was 10 to 12-year-old boys, and I was like 8 or 7 or 8 or something when Kiss was going on, and it's like I didn't get it, but the older kids were like, yeah, Kiss, and so I'd be like, yeah, Kiss, and then the Dolls, they came out with the Dolls and everything. I'm sorry, that's a side. I hijacked that whole thing. You were talking about your experience with music.
No, it's all this. It's all the same. No, but I mean, so I was always into metal. Merciful Fate. I would get into that, like, who is this insane vocalist? Like, what is going on here? But I remember listening to At War with Satan, and I'd be listening to Venom, but my brain would go, wait, are you at war with, as in on the side of, or at with as against? This is very, I don't understand what's going on here. So that would be the sort of the metal side, the Clash and DOA and the Exploited. So a lot of the hardcore stuff. Ska I was really into for quite a while. The Specials and the Selector and that kind of thing. But it wasn't until connected, I guess, more in retrospect now, looking back, it was Skinny Puppy that really blew me out of the water for very weird industrial electronica.
Oh yeah.
And I remember buying God the Perpetual Intercourse, no, Mind the Perpetual Intercourse. And I listened to the first two songs and I said, this is shit. And I brought it over to my friend's house. And he called me back maybe the next day or whatever and says, dude, you got to come listen to this. I'm like, okay. And then I got past it. Like it's like black metal. You kind of have to immerse yourself in it. You can't try to figure it out. And I listened to that, God's Gift Maggot. I was just like, what? Okay, this is just awesome. So, but yeah, that's kind of the trajectory. But lately, though, because I've been trying to learn a little bit of music theory and piano and stuff, Thelonious Monk and Art Tatum, and I'm trying to understand jazz and the history of jazz. And, I'll never play it, but I'm starting to get an ear for it. Like I can feel it way more than I could before. So I think there's not a heck of a lot of music that I can't listen to. I may not listen to a lot of it or for extended periods of time, but
yeah, I know that's really interesting. I had Spike the percussionist on the show recently, and that episode hasn't dropped yet. But he's a drummer. He plays in a bunch of bands here in Houston. He's just he's an incredible drummer. But he also does drone, right? He has a similar thing, the similar like path where he's like gone through drone, and just like listening to your story and everything as a percussionist, like coming into this, I see all these similarities in the process. And there's also like interest in black magic and chaos magic that emerges out of all of this. And I can't help but no, you mentioned the Exploited, and I used to know the guitarist for the Exploited lived in, and see, you might know this already. And when I lived in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in the Electric Hellfire Club days, the guitarist for the Exploited, they liked Kenosha, and they had come and played there a few times, right? And they made friends with all of the little punk scene there. There's this little punk scene there. What did they call themselves? They were like the Uptown Punks, and there's a punk band called Beautiful Bert and the Luscious Ones, and they were all like really tight with the Exploited. And so the guitarist for the Exploited had moved to Kenosha with the drummer. I think it was the drummer for UK Subs. I think it's like who used to be in UK Subs, and they started a new band. They were starting a new band there called Billy Goat, and then that Billy Goat band went on and toured and stuff, and ended up like decades later, I'm living in like in Houston, Texas, and Billy Goat like comes through town. I'm like, that's so weird.
Well, it's funny though. When you mentioned the other drummer, that's how I started getting into synthesizers. Was we were sort of tailing into like the doom stuff we like to do, but we don't vocalize like a doom band. So like we don't have the growl or that. So we don't want to sell ourselves as doom when we're not going to be a doom experience. But we were sort of going into the ambient side. So we have the electric violin and cello, and we have the electric guitar through a lot of distortion. And I thought, well, the last thing we need is me going like this on the cymbals or chimes or something. Like I'm done. I can't. There's nothing else I know how to do. So I started researching synthesizers for whatever reason, and I saw that they weren't initially meant to be a musical instrument. It was more for sound effects or strange ambient sounds and special effects. So I thought, well, shit, that's exactly what I need, something that's noisy and spooky. So, I did some more research, bought a monophonic synth, and then you start talking to people who are other keyboardists, and someone here in the city said, you can put that through a guitar pedal, right? I'm like, you can do what now?
Whoa, you're like,
how the fuck does that work? So yeah, so I mean and then the slippery slope. I'll never get anything that's super expensive because I just don't. I mean, I don't have the time put in, and I don't really have like I'm not a modular synth guy. I don't have the space for that or the patience. But I do have what I have now works well for my own stuff, but it can also work with Obsidian Will. So I can take bits and pieces of it, this pedal and that synth, or change it up a bit. So that led me, because I was an acoustic drummer, and we were trying to do ambient things with electronics. I was like, well, that doesn't leave me a lot. But apparently, it's not uncommon for drummers to be the synth player or the keyboardist.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned.
Yeah, no, it doesn't surprise me. And I had a similar experience with like pedals too. And this is when I was like I was learning to play guitar. I just kind of like launched away from like taking lessons, and I was trying to like play guitar, and I wanted to make it sound more like the Bauhaus. I was into the Bauhaus and Joy Division, and the post-punk thing was what I was like trying to, what I was really into at the time. And I went and visited some guy, and he was like playing guitar, and he had the Boss digital delay pedal. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's a classic pedal. This pedal's like more important than the fucking telephone, as far as like the evolution of like music, I think. But I saw him like, click that, it's white. It's the blue and white pedal, right? And I saw this guy, he's strumming and clicking it, and I saw, how he was using the delay, and I was like, oh, that blew my mind. All of a sudden that explained all of these sounds that I had heard before, because there's something like Bauhaus, Press the Eject and Give Me the Tape, the live album. It's just filled with delay, It's like that's how he gets that guitar sound, It's like all this delay. And suddenly I realized I could do that, and I'm like, wow. So I did it so I got that, I saved up my money, I got that pedal, and then shortly after that I realized, oh, you can put vocals through this. Whoa. And then you start thinking, what else could I put through this? And there you have it. Drone was born. Well, in my mind, Drone was born. But right, I mean, there you go. You've got it. And I don't know if I ever told you, I actually did a drone industrial like kind of like project, and this had to be like 1987 or 88. I was mostly playing in a punk rock band called Red Max at the time, but I did a side thing with this friend of mine, Bob Jensen, and it was called Techno Shock. And basically, he just found a bunch of samples. He had a old 4-track recorder. And so he just had a bunch of samples on the 4-track recorder and just put some like stupid noise on it. And I'm like, dude, let's run this through my digital delay pedal and my distortion pedal. There you go. We got to go it on,
See, and that's the thing. I hate delay. Reverb is so. I bought a simple multi-stomp, and it was okay, but every video I kept seeing with the Eventide Space, so I was like, I need that pedal, but it's like $600 here. So I was like, I can't afford that, stupid. But somehow I managed to buy 3 pedals that cost more than that. And I'm like, fuck this. So I sell them at a loss, buy the stupid Space, and now it's just like, why didn't I just start this way? I always buy the delay. And I'm like, why do I keep doing this to myself? It's reverb I need. I have delay. It's fine. I run my drum machine through Eventide Time Factor. So I have those. Those are amazing. And you can always tell synth people, it's either Strymon or Eventide, but the synth people are just, you got to put it through your reverb. I'm like, yes, listen to the interwebs. They know what's going on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, delay. It's like an amazing thing. So you know what someone really needs to do is start making delay pedals that have, and musical gear in general, incorporating precious metals and jewelry like diamond encrusted, like bling them out and stuff, because that way they'll retain their value. I mean, you're going to pay more for that pedal, but when you go to resell it, it's going to retain its value. You're going to make your money back on it, So it'll be an investment that way. And then, people like us that are like just addicted to gear, will have a fighting chance.
No, we won't, because then we'll buy substandard pedals with lots of bling. Like, that's not helpful.
All right. Fine. Shoot me down.
Well, make some kind of, sigil pedals. But that's the thing. Like, I don't, the people that create these things, like synthesizers or pedals, like that are, if not engineers, they're at least electronically, uh, very good at doing that, sort of sitting down and putting the components together. You could do some pretty crazy shit. Like, I can imagine if you had a black magician who was also good at putting together electronics like that. I mean, if you could almost create an entire interesting music project from beginning to end, that all of it is, this immersive, subjective, magical tool. But I'm not that person. So
No, it's another way of like thinking about it. Another way of thinking about music is creating things for musicians rather than creating things for. It's like, it goes back to that question of who is this for, right? What is this creation like for? And music, I mean, musicianship is something that is just like exploded, right? And I mean, back in the day, when you hear like when you hear Ozzy Osbourne telling stories about how he got into music, and he's like, "Oh, well, be like the Beatles," and it's like that's it. That's everyone's story. Is like there was like one band, the Beatles, right? If you lived in England, yeah, there's like more than that. But basically, the ability to, at the time that all that was happening, and it's like, and I'm sure there's all these weird economic, cultural factors that go into this. Suddenly, like ordinary people could get more and more people were able to get, like a kid's able to get a guitar, whereas like 20, 30 years ago getting a guitar is a big fucking deal, right? Like, you listen to like the Robert Johnson story, or something like that. It's like he managed to get one guitar, right? That's what he had. He had one fucking guitar and one acoustic guitar, and that's it. That's all he had, and he used that. With that one thing, he did everything from there, and it was amazing that he did it. I mean, he had all his friends and family that had no chance they're ever going to get a guitar, right? So that's like changed radically. Like when you get into like the post-war world, it's more and more common. So it's like instrumentation is out there. So there's basically, and now we're at the point where it's just like just about every kid, every boy like gets a guitar at one point and has some kind of like experience with it, and I don't know what the percentages are, but it's got to be pretty, significant. So there's really this whole culture that's just about music, right? That's just about wants to do it. So that's another way of looking at the whole approach to doing music is like, who are you making this for? Well, maybe this is for musicians rather than just fans,
Yeah, no. I mean, if you look at the Sears catalog, I mean, aside from the lingerie part, there was always, an introductory drum kit, a guitar, electric guitar, and a bass guitar. I mean, I can remember that even as a kid. So it was always back in the day, people, you didn't have the internet, so you had to order things through a catalog. But I mean, that was always there. It was like, oh, I'd like to learn that, but then it's like, no, then you have to practice. You have to, sit down and suffer through this, and so that, yeah, that suffering part of it, I think, is a huge, whether it's financial suffering in the sense of Robert Johnson having to, coming up with that ability to get that guitar. I mean, that becomes, that's a magical tool at that point. And so that's coming up with the money for it, coming up for the time, coming up with the ideas. Again, a lot of people way better than I am at a whole lot of things can play 15 different, songs or sight read flawlessly, but they're not composing. I remember working with a first degree once who was talking about, he's played piano and could do all this stuff. And I said, well, have you ever composed something for yourself? And he said, no. And I'm like, well, there you go. You got your assignment. Go do something, So it's got to be that inner drive to, for me, it has to be that inner drive to reflect what's going on within me. And I think you and Toby had talked about that as well, in that, about putting it out there so you can see it yourself, like externally, but then also starting to build up people around you that can give you feedback and engage with you about that. And I think that's really vital.
No, I think it's really true. So, we like to say that, nowadays, all the great left-hand path magicians are also left-hand path musicians because it's almost like I said, it's creeping over into this. It's almost like a lifestyle thing. So, have you ever felt that that you have an imperative that you need to do music because it's just something that you need to do? Like your head will explode if you don't do it. Like it doesn't even matter. Like you could even like take the question of who's going to hear this or who this is for and say, it doesn't even matter. I need to do it. So in a way, it's for me, almost like a therapeutic type thing.
Yeah. I would say music is the current iteration of that exploding experience. It can be visual art where I would immerse myself in painting, or I also do lino cuts, so I love doing that. So there has to be some creative outlet. Right now, though, I see music as a retirement discipline. You know, I have just started to look at music theory, so I have the rest of my life to look at that. I am just learning how to play some piano, so I have the rest of my life to improve on that. So I do see music currently as that thing which I need to do. There always has to be a thing, and I suspect this will probably be it for a very long time.
So you're playing piano?
Well, I have an electric piano, so I mean, I'm just doing like scales and practicing
Okay.
like not actually reading songs or playing songs, but it's mostly just to move my fingers. I mean, when I'm doing synths, that's what I love about synthesizers. You just hold the damn thing down, latch it,
Right.
you're good. You don't need to worry about this stuff. But the piano, I can spend hours. Let me rephrase that. I can spend many dozens of minutes sitting at the electric piano, just noodling around. I love it, and I suspect it's the same with anybody who's playing guitar too. You know, you can just noodle around. So they don't really translate for me. Like what I if I come up with something like D F E C or something, if I'm playing that or even in chords, that doesn't translate to my synth because I'm going through a bunch of distortion and pedals. So even if I find something on the piano, it's not necessarily going to translate into what is I would be hearing if I was playing through my synthesizer. So I just view them as two different outlets, but they sort of build on each other. The piano, playing piano, introduced me to understanding like jazz pianists, or that sort of stuff. It's like, oh, now I understand why they sounded so annoying before because I didn't understand what they were doing. I can't do what they're doing, but I appreciate what's going on now, and that makes me pay more attention to what the musician is doing.
Yeah. No, that's it. So you just reminded me. No, that's the other thing that came up when I was like talking to Spike. We ended up talking about jazz, and we ended up talking about he knows jazz a lot better than me. He knows all these great jazz drummers, and he gave me a lot of great stuff on it. But for me, like I go back to like Thelonious Monk. I think he's like he's the magus of jazz, right? I mean, just total magic. And it's like as just with my small monkey brain, listening to him like play that, I'm like, what? How does that work? How does that work? But it works, right? Because I mean, someone who doesn't know how to play the piano and goes up and starts going, right away that this is like, just stop that. It's horrible. Don't do that. But he just has this amazing ability, and to me, it's one time period. It's this time period of the '60s, and that's it for jazz. And there's Thelonious Monk, and there's Miles Davis, and there's John Coltrane, and I don't know, maybe a couple of others that I can't think of right now. And that's it. And it's like other jazz, I to me, it's like there's jazz influences and things, but there's no other like jazz thing that has just completely sucked me into it. But that whole time period is just extraordinary. And it's like no one can replicate it. No one can ever do that again, right? It happened, and it has to do not just with the musicians, but it has to do with the recording technology at the time, the access that these people had to recording technology and record labels and stuff to like, create durable media for it. All these like factors like converge together to create like this one thing that is just absolutely amazing and magical.
Well, there's the both Thelonious Monk and Art Tatum, a few of the records that I have. The live ones I love because where the mics are, you can hear them going off, and this like there's just they're vocalizing as they're going on, and
Right.
it's just this. You can tell they're so utterly immersed in what they're doing, and I love that. Like when I play live with the band, I don't. I'm usually quite serious because if I'm not, I'm going to fuck up. I fuck up anyways, and that's fine. I'm not worried about that. But it's more I don't want to bring everybody else down. So if I can do it on my own, that's fine. So I don't usually. I'm not adept enough to be able to just sit back, relax, and go do my thing. So I always, when I hear somebody so at ease with what they're doing, it makes me very excited. It's very cool to hear that.
Yeah, and the physical engagement is another interesting thing, and I'm thinking specifically of like Thelonious Monk has like such an interesting like I'm sure you've seen like the videos, like the films of him like playing and his like his like way he's like moving and the way he like has his leg, his foot is down here like it's so bizarre. And so this makes me think of the difference. This was another question that I wanted to ask you is like the difference between, say, doing a show with Cygnus Onyx Flame, where it's like you're mainly you're doing some stuff here, technical things up here, and there's devices that are creating the sound. And the difference between that and like playing the drums where you're like your body has to be engaged in the rhythm or else you couldn't do it. You have to be physically engaged in it. What experientially, what is the difference for you?
It's an interesting question. I don't know that it is that different. I mean, a drummer doesn't need to move much at all. If you, especially jazz drummers, if you look, but even the metal, most of that flair is unnecessary. So if you were to take your kit really, really tight, you can almost just use your wrists. You don't really need
Oh,
to do
sure.
much.
Yeah. And I'm not saying you have to like be like, whirling your sticks around. I'm just saying you have to be physically engaged. You have to
Yeah.
hold a stick in your hand and you have to hit something in a certain time and rhythm or else
Yeah.
it won't sound good.
I thought, yeah, no, and I know that too. But yeah, it's what I find, and it's goofy because I feel like somehow I'm faking this, but I'm not because I'm not consciously thinking about it. I don't know if you've ever seen Typo Negative,
Oh yeah.
but Joss Silver, where he has a keyboard with the huge hair, like when he's just blah, and then the hair goes flying over. I just find myself even when I'm just doing my own thing, and none of it is fast or heavy, like that you would start headbanging to it or something. But I do feel like I'm sinking my body into it, even though the keys don't need extra weight. I don't need to hammer on a wire like a piano. So I still feel like I'm going to move my body into it, even though it's not to the same degree. I guess with drums, it's just more of you have to do that or you don't get a sound. There has to be some kind of impact. But I think any instrument, at least when I'm watching other musicians and stuff, you can always tell when they're really into what they're doing because their whole body exudes that. In something like martial arts or weapons forms and stuff, you can tell when someone's not fully there because the sword's drooping or they're getting punched in the head. But when you see a musician, if they're really tight, then you don't feel relaxed or comfortable watching that. But if you see someone who's just right into what they're doing, there was a Metallica video, one of their movies, and they were talking to Kurt, and they said, he says, "Oh, I want to use the silver guitar," and the engineer's like, "Well, why don't you get the green one? Is it the guitarist or the guitar that makes the sound?" And he turns to the camera and he goes, "Is there a difference?" And I was like, "Oh, interesting. The guitarist and the guitar are one in this case." Uh,
Oh,
so yeah, thought that was kind of funny.
that's deep.
Of course, I've said that to musicians. They go, "Yes, there is a difference," and the musician walks away. I'm like, okay, it's whatever.
No, that's very interesting. And I think about this a lot also, because I spent a lot of time with Asmodeus X. For a while we had guitars, and I played guitar in it, and then our guitarist Frank Faust died, and then And then we just kind of like didn't do guitars for a while after that at all, and just went totally electronic, right? And so all of my engagement in the music um, was programming. Occasionally, I do a live thing where you're hitting a synthesizer, but it's like you're saying, it's like I wasn't a keyboard player, right? So, so when I'd like tell like my family, I'd go, visit my family or whatever for the holidays. Timely, Christmas is coming up, so all the musicians who listen to this can think of this. You're going home, and your parents are going to say, "So, are you still doing the band? You still playing in a band? What do you do in the band?" Uncle Uncle Josh is going to like want to know, and and I'd be like, and I'd say, well, and then we have keyboards. And I do programming on keyboards, and they don't understand what that means. So it's like, oh, so you play the keyboards? I'm like, well, my sense of truth, right? My sense of self honesty is, well, I can't really tell them that I play it because I don't really play it. And then I'm going through this like process in my mind of like, well, I guess I'm really just a pretender. I guess I'm just really fake.
But you rock the theremin though, so I mean, come on.
Yeah, I did. I did rock the theremin, and that's a real thing. But you can't tell Uncle Joe about that at Christmas dinner because it's a whole story, and it's like you're gonna lose him somewhere around. Oh, and he was kidnapped by the Soviets and taken back and went to the Gulag. But still, RCA continued to like manufacture, and then Bob Moog, who invented the synthesizer, it's like way too much to explain that you're just waving your hands in the air and not touching anything and playing an instrument. So I went through a process. This is all to say, I went through a process where eventually I was like, I had to go back and start playing the guitar. And so as the Asmodeus X stuff that's coming out, that's being produced now is like all acoustic like instruments and stuff like that, because I felt like there was something, I felt a separation. You know what I'm saying? I felt like there was some kind of like separation between me and the music, right? Like I was like just like I was like somehow removed from it. Like I wasn't, engaged with it to the appropriate degree. And I'm not saying no one is, right? I'm not saying no one ever is, but I didn't feel the engagement anymore with it at that level of it. So I had to like be doing something where I'm like, I'm making the sound all the way through the song. I'm like gonna, make a sound. That makes a song.
And now you have stories to tell around the table.
Yes. Yeah, I have much better stories for Christmas dinner, but the the tragic thing is like all my relatives are like dying now, so I'm not really gonna have anyone to like talk to. But hey, I got the podcast. So let's talk about the connection between magic and music, and what does that mean for you?
Well, I'd like to be smart enough to talk about the Gurdjieff and talk about the Aeneid and all that kind of stuff, but I think it comes down to creating. So if we look at black magic as representing the black magician creating their subjective self, like being able to understand and bring that into being, that comes through in a whole lot of different ways. But music, art in general, but music, I think, because it's so technically, there's so much very precise technical skill that you can develop and apply when you're dealing with octaves and when you're dealing with the different scales, the different modes. I mean, I think all of that, I think, is it's almost like Pythagoras thought this through and said, here is your tool that you can use. So I mean, I can see that in a general sense. I don't know how to apply that myself. It's just more like I'm currently obsessed with alternating between D and A for some reason. I'm sure there's a very good mathematical reason why those two things are in my brain, but I don't know that well enough. So I would just say that it is a way of understanding and creating something which is totally you. There's only so many notes that you can use, but yet we can come up with so many varieties of ways of expressing ourselves to ourselves and then to others. So yeah, I would just say that it's a remarkable tool, but it's one that I don't know well enough to be able to pick apart in a very astute way.
So you like A and D?
Yeah, I don't know why. Just always.
I like A and
Always.
D. No, they're fine. No, I like them. They're good. I like, you know what I like right now? I like A minor and
Ooh.
C. A minor and C.
Okay.
There's something real magical, and this is probably because of the guitar chord like fingering on it. They're like, I don't know, they're really close to each other. It's a real easy transition. And then if you throw in a G on that,
Yeah.
that's like half of the Death in June songs right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah. Oh, you
I
heard
think
it. Yeah.
there was a Doors video where I forget the keyboardist. I can't remember his name right now. Oh, so stupid. Anyway,
Ray Manzarek.
yes. So he was playing something and he went back to the guitarist and said, "Okay, well, I'm doing this." And he goes, "That's great that you're playing that on a keyboard, but it doesn't work on a guitar." I'm like, "Oh, poor guitarist."
No, they're totally different. So, Paul Simon once famously said, or wrote, I don't know where this comes from, but that all songwriters, right? So there's two. You got to with musicians. There's musicians, and some musicians are songwriters, and not all musicians are writers, right? And that's cool. Some of the non-writer musicians are the best fucking musicians ever in the world, you know. But Paul Simon said that all songwriters, they start out with they're either string based or else they're keyboard based, right? I mean, guitar based or guitar or piano. And once you like lock into that, you're pretty much that's it. And there's only a few exceptions to that, you know. David Bowie could like play both of them. He could songwrite from like both of them, and maybe a few others. But I mean, there's something like really significant about that, and I think that has to do with that those devices come back to the physicality of the stuff that you were talking about with Pythagoras, Gurdjieff, the scales, everything like that, and the way it's like laid out, and it's laid out in such a way that the body, an individual can work with it and get where they need to go with it. And there's like lots of other instruments that are stringed and stuff like that, but they don't lend themselves as well to that writing like kind of process, to where you could just see, like, I mean, you just said it. I like A and D right now, because you can see where that is and you can make your A and D and that's what jazz is. That's what like these like Thelonious Monk and these musicians they're just finding one riff. Hey, let's do A D C, and just like and just like play with it, we just all play with it for a while,
Well, I think there's a reason. I mean, Kenneth Grant, bless his soul, talks about jazz and at least early jazz. So that sort of discordant, sort of syncopated kind of music. And I think the one thing that jazz, and again, I'm fairly ignorant about this subject, but what I find interesting is that unlike classical music, which is you can explore classical music, but you have a lot of rules that you kind of have to stay within. But in jazz, it's like, well, let's just go explore. Like we're going to go figure out where this goes. And I think that's remarkable. I'm not going to try to play anything like that, but just hearing it and knowing that that's, that training, a lot of jazz musicians have been, trained throughout, their life, but the way they apply it is uniquely their own.
What about Sun Ra?
So yeah, I think I've got a little bit of most people, but I've never got into Sun Ra yet. Who's the other? Oh, organist or jazz organ is crazy too. I totally love that. I love hearing that, but it's acquired taste. Doctor, yeah, this is embarrassing. Anyway, forget it. It's not that important.
Wait, it's a doctor? No, we want to know now. Everyone wants to know what? There's a doctor?
Doctor. Oh.
Dr. Love? Dr. Strangelove.
Oh, great. We're back to Kiss.
Dr. Feelgood.
Dr. Love. Doctor. Okay, now you're going to make me look this up. All right, hang on. Keep talking.
Was he the guitarist for Sun Ra? Or
no,
keyboard organist for Sun Ra?
Yeah.
Okay. So Sun Ra was all about, space is the place. I think that's like
Yeah.
his best song, Space is the Place. I mean, the guy was
What's
like, I mean, he was like a prophetic dude.
Yeah. No, his stage show is crazy. See, that's what I find. I have yet to get a gig, but in my mind, I'm like, okay, what am I going to do on stage? How is this going to look? Like, how do you learn your songs first and then worry about what it looks like? But they're part of the same thing. If you're going to play live, you need to have some kind of imagery, whether it's no imagery and just dark, darkness, which is fine, or something which is engaging. Like Asmodeus X, I think is great. Like, you see the videos, like you guys obviously put effort into the imagery that you're using and how you come across.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, space is the place, man. Sun Ra. So the problem with Sun Ra is that he didn't record. He did. There's no good recordings, right? It's like you got 20 musicians, and he never had like a multi-track. I don't think there's any multi-track recordings that exist of it. Everything that was recorded was someone's in the room like holding a microphone with like 20 musicians going, and it's like, it's so it lacks the finesse you'd have from a multi-track recording. Um, and what I've heard is that he was like, he's very like prophetic and like, well, we don't need to fuck that, we don't need to do that, and it's all about like the energy of the live performance. And yeah, there's something to that, but as a result of that, they didn't create any durable media, so no one can really get in and appreciate the finesse of it, which you could do. I mean, like the Beatles, Sergeant Pepper's was recorded with two four
Mm.
track recorders. And that's so rudimentary. And everything before that was like a 4 track or else a 2 track thing, right? So it's like just even with like once you go to like 8 tracks, and I think isn't there some Doors, or maybe there's a Doors album that's like the first like full like 8 track thing, but it's like once you get to that, it's like that expands things so much to create like the separation of the technicality of how all of the instruments go together. And I think that's part of the magic of the 60s jazz, which is based on like quartets,
Yeah.
right? Because there's jazz before that was like big band, which is an incredible thing too. We could talk about, I think Glenn Miller and all that stuff is like pretty extraordinary too, but it's like the 4 guys, and everyone is a frequency, right? The bass is like, this, frequency, and then the drums and either, guitar or sax or whatever.
It's all subtlety, which I find really, I mean, it's so funny. Like, I love extremes, like, something black metal, which is a wall of, well, hell, the stuff we create, wall of sound. But when you listen to really good jazz, like a quartet or even a trio, like when you're listening to it, it's all subtle. The drummer is very subtle in what they're doing, and the guitarist to be very subtle. And it's in the space in between, and it's a very Lovecraftian thing. So
Yeah.
it's the angles in between where the silence is, where it punctuates the song. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's ridiculously awesome.
Well, Cygnus, man, I got to thank you for like visiting us again. Are we going to listen to a song?
Sure. So this is a rough draft of a song that will be the opening track for the EP. EP should be out sometime in February, I think. So this is just me doing a rough draft of a dreadful malfunction.
Okay.
All the components are there. It won't sound like this at the end, though. Once it's finished.
Okay, so this is a dreadful malfunction for Songs for a Cosmonaut. Before I spin this, I have to ask,
Yeah.
do you have any advice for our listeners for how they can survive the dark times that lie before us?
Don't give up on yourself. I mean, it sounds trite, but every single thing comes back to you. And if you haven't figured that out yet, get on it. And we have been talking about music. There's a lot more going on behind talking about music. And it all comes down to get your shit together and trust yourself and understand how you need to create your universe.
For the devil sends the beast forth with wrath, for he knows the time is short. Hell yeah. All right. Keep rocking it, Cygnus Onyx Flame, and this is a dreadful malfunction.